If you like this episode, please subscribe, share with others, rate and review so we can continue to bring you great programming.
This is The Thing About Cars, a podcast for car enthusiasts and the people who love them.
Hello and welcome to The Thing About Cars. I'm your very much out of breath host, Mickey Desai, not for any good reasons. Let's do our little sound check, voice check around the table. Dave, how are you?
Breathless.
Misty, how is it overseas?
Autumnless.
Ben?
Oh, well, am I okay? How about you?
You are okay. That's fantastic. Our guest for today, and let me make sure I'm getting his name correct, David Kreidler, who is the Senior Exhibits Curator for the Harley-Davidson /GM Museum up in Michigan. Isn't that right, David?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's Kreidler.
Kreidler.
It's Kreidler.
Let's do a take two, shall we?
Yep.
Our guest for today is David Kreidler, who's the Senior Exhibits Curator for the Harley-Davidson /GM Museum in Milwaukee. How are you, David?
Doing good. Did you say the /GM Museum?
Is that not appropriate? Because when I first learned about it, it said Harley-Davidson and GM.
Oh, no. Nope, we're just the
Harley-Davidson
Museum. Yeah.
Oh, GM can get their own damn museum. Okay.
That's exactly right. Let them do their own. I'm not carrying any water for them.
Yeah.
This does not bode well.
Hiding in the wings today, the best PR guy in the world for the world's only Harley-Davidson museum. How are you, Tim?
Doing well. Thank you
Great.
very much.
Yeah, please. I know your intent is to spectate, but please jump in if the urge ever strikes. So, Ben,
For those of you in the audience, Tim is actually here to kill David if he mistakes anything about Harley Davidson.
maybe metaphorically, but
it's a very high risk show today.
Yeah,
we're protecting a classic American brand. We're protecting a series of American treasures here, right? So, we have to be careful, and yet not, because reputations are fragile, machines are not. So
egos are fragile.
There you go. That's it. Misty nails it. Episode's done. Ben, have you got a trivia item for us today?
Yes, I do. Since our Tim is away at the racetrack, I think, this weekend.
Yeah, he's off the races.
Yeah, I can fill in. And this is a pretty simple one. Well, yes and no, really. But it's short and sweet. In the 1990 model year, the first built-in GPS system in cars appeared. If I knew it, I'm filling it at the last moment, by the way. If I knew I was going to do that, I'd have something Harley appropriate, but forgive me. Anyway, 1990 model year, the first in-car GPS systems appeared. Was it in the Acura NSX, the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, the Mazda Unos Cosmo, or the Cadillac Fleetwood? And we will answer that at the end of the show, but chew on it for now.
So, David, you know that we do a trivia question at the top of every show, that we end at the end of every show, that we answer at the end of every show. Would you have any Harley trivia we could chew on while the episode's in progress?
Oh, yeah. Here's one. How many different owners has Harley-Davidson had in the last 121?
Wow, how many different owners? Okay.
And I'm including owners groups, shareholders, all the above.
Okay, so we will answer that question also at the end of the show. First of all, thank you for being our guest today, David. I'm really glad we get to meet you and see you or do this recording together. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. What does it mean to be the Senior Exhibits Curator for Harley-Davidson? That must be, one, really cool, and two, I imagine it's kind of demanding.
It's really cool. It's always interesting. It's not. I want to say it's demanding, but it's fun. It really is. And nothing fun can be really all that demanding. So I develop exhibits at the museum, which means that all the content, so photographs, motorcycles that go in, stories we tell, any artifacts other than the motorcycles that go in those exhibits, those are me. Those are me and my team, I guess I should say. It's always a collaborative affair that we work through. So every exhibit is a team effort, but for the most part, the person guiding those stories is me.
That's fantastic. How big is your team?
There's myself. Then we have another curator. She's currently finishing up her exhibit about black motorcycle riders in around New York City.
Wow.
And then we have an exhibit designer and our chief curator, and then the guy who does all the heavy lifting. We have an exhibit tech. He's the guy who cleans the museum every morning and fixes things and prepares everything to go out on exhibits. So
I have a couple questions related to the actual logistics of putting together an exhibit, and I want to open the floor to my friends here so they can ask questions. When you start to look at the museum and the exhibits you want to bring through there, are you designing the exhibit from scratch? Are you setting the tone and writing down the topic and outlining what you want to see, like a research paper? Or does an exhibit travel the world and come to you? How do those things get formed? And then how long does it take from concept to display?
I think museums are an interesting melding point of academia and general popular wants and desires. Because ultimately, who we're presenting our stuff to is the general public, whereas a historian would be presenting probably to other historians most often. We're trying to reach people where they are. So it starts off with us really kind of kicking around ideas, in all honesty. What exhibit topics do we think are out there that people can connect with, that we know that people have in the past connected with, or something new that might be different, might be exciting. Because ultimately, I think for us too is we're always looking for a way, that hook. What is that hook that's going to get people interested? A lot of our visitors, 50% of them actually have no connection to motorcycling whatsoever. So that's another thing that comes up for us as we're thinking about topics is, okay, well, if I'm a non-rider, non-motorcycle person, what is something that I could connect to through motorcycling or through Harley-Davidson history? What are those things that we're talking about? So that's one way, and then generally that'll sketch it out, But the other aspect to our jobs is we're the Harley-Davidson Museum. We are a corporate museum, which is a strange thing in the world. 99.99% of museums out in the United States are nonprofits. They're their own standalone things. They can do what they want when they want, and dictating by what their business and what their business needs are.
My last question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. We are connected to Harley-Davidson Motor Company, so they're my bosses. And so every once in a while too, something new and exciting will come out, and we'll want to talk about that. Here's this new motorcycle, and for us too, it's kind of like, here's this new motorcycle. Here's how it works. Here's maybe its heritage, where it came from. Here's where the ideas came from for this exhibit, or for this motorcycle, excuse me. And or we just want to talk about something exciting going on at the motor company. It's really kind of fascinating from one angle of how, you talk about exhibit ideas, but how a motorcycle becomes something is really an interesting and fascinating thing, an aspect. And I really appreciate that I've gotten through this job to really be able to get into that with engineers and the motorcycle designers themselves of how do you take an idea, or I want to build this new thing, and then turn it into something that actually goes vroom vroom and people love. So
right. Gang, what do you think? Have any questions for David?
Well, I do. Has there ever been an exhibit that you've kind of wanted to plan, or something like that, and corporate went, yeah, let's not?
No. Actually,
well, that was my question though.
So I've never had corporate kill an idea. No. With the thing with Harley-Davidson, there's so in part, I think corporate has recognized over the years the power of storytelling and the power of our museum. We are the only motorcycle museum run by a motorcycle company in the United States, and we're such an old company. We're such a historic company. I should say old. Probably cut that. But we're such a historic company. We've got all this history, and that's one of the amazing things about the museum and the archives itself. So the museum, the content of it is the Harley-Davidson archives. And Harley-Davidson has been around for 121 years, and they've basically been collecting things for 121 years. So, our archives go back to the earliest days of the company. We can, so we've got some of my favorite objects or documents, whatever you want to look at them, are in the archives, are the board minute meeting books for when the company first incorporated. So we started tracking Harley-Davidson history in 1903 when they built their first motorcycle in a shed. The company incorporated in 1907. And what's great about these board books is, these guys are 20-somethings. Before the Davidsons and William Harley and the three Davidson brothers. Before that, they've been working in industry. They've been, two of the Davidsons worked for railroads, and then Arthur Davidson and William Harley worked at a manufacturing company. That was their background. And so these board minute meeting books, I don't know if this is how it actually worked, but at the front cover of them, we can see with a store they bought these things from, because they were just kind of standard. Here, write this. Here's a board minute meeting book. You can buy it at a paper store down the street. And at the very front cover, there's directions for how to incorporate your company. And nice. I like to imagine that these guys sat down with this thing around a table and went, okay, step number 1. But we have those things and motorcycles too. So it's an incredible collection to get to work with every day. And the stories we can tell are endless just through the collection itself, and nothing but support from the motor company. I have had ideas that died simply because I couldn't explain them, but no one killed them. It was mostly my own. I reached too far, I think.
Well,
yeah.
So on this point, David, a lot of my clients are museums, and I'm curious about what would you say has been the most successful or popular exhibit you ever did, and B, was there one that was the most controversial?
Was popular. I can tell you which ones I've enjoyed the most, and I can tell you which ones I've thought were very successful. Depending on the exhibit, there have been different. How we judge success is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. You want to maximize people coming through the door, or do you want to get out a story that you want to tell? That's important. And so, I've had so many fun ones. Probably as far as people through the door, I did an exhibit. It's been 10 years ago now, about the American road trip, which is fun. Particularly, the kind of Americana look back at the American road trip. That one was really, really fun. We've done another one on, there's a race in I think it's still in Wildwood, New Jersey, on the beach, called the Race of Gentlemen, which is historic bikes, historic cars, and they race along the beach. And we did an exhibit about them as well, which was fun and very popular, because these guys take these historic cars and bikes and they fix them up, and then they drag race basically on a section of beach on the Atlantic. Geez, I can go on and on for hours, I think.
So here's where I get snarky and I ask, the Great American Road Trip while wearing leather, or while you're a Hell's Angel, or is it just
chiffon?
Well, it's all of the above. That's one thing that's been fun about the job, is sometimes we spread our wings a little bit away from Harley. So that was just as much about the car trip, the pile into the mom and dad's station wagon, as it was about we had motorcycles in there for these guys that had just finished a cross country ride on hardtail choppers, which must have been kind of brutal, but brutal. But they're young guys, so they recovered. So it was kind of all of the above, really.
Ben, you got a question? Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, actually, Ben, go ahead. I cut you off.
Well, to kind of diverge a little bit onto the motorcycles themselves, I'm curious. I don't know much about the Harley museums, so do y'all lean more toward, are they just kind of static forever, or do you keep them pickled so that they're all still operable?
No, we don't. We drain all the fluids. The way we say it was, you drain all the fluids, so we don't know if they could run or not. There's nothing wrong with them mechanically, but who knows? And we're not going to find out. So
Okay. Yeah, I was curious because there seem to be differing schools of thought on that these days. Some places, once it's there, and it's never all it's going to be is dusted, and others, take things out and run occasionally. And it's interesting dichotomy.
yeah, our museum's different. I
Right.
tell people coming through too that if the museum closed tomorrow and we just shut our doors and didn't invite anybody else in, the collection itself will continue to work for the motor company.
Right.
Ultimately our collection is the Harley-Davidson Archives collection, and most of our motorcycle. Well, one of my colleagues on the team, he manages on the archive side of our team. He manages the vehicle collection, and it's not unusual for him to be doing work for engineering or our design team. They'll call him up and say, "Hey, I need." We call them part fittings. Harley Davidson's coming out. Well, they came out with a new battery pack a few years ago, and they needed to make sure that it fit, older models. And where do you go when you're Harley Davidson, you need an older model? Well, the archives has the older models you're looking for. And so here, does this fit here? Does this fit here? Does this fit here on motorcycles in the 90s or whatever they need to fit those to? And then they'll go back and go, okay, it doesn't fit here. We'll need to make some changes to it, and then we'll try this whole thing again. So the archives itself is used by everyone from our legal department to our general merchandise and apparel and licensing. So the clothing, the various other, everything you see with Harley Davidson on it, that's on a motorcycle, to, our design team. Quite a lot of our motorcycles take influences from historic models. Or they'll hide little Easter eggs from historic models, which is one of my favorite things that they do on new models. That little design details that they'll steal, or engineering. How does this work? How does that work? How did they do it in the 80s? How did they do it in the 70s? To get this look, to manufacture this, to do that. So the archives is a working archives. We're not just here to have pretty little things to look at for the public. Although we do that too, and they really are awesome things.
Yeah,
I can imagine. Dave, you had a question?
Yeah. So David, when found out you was going to be on your show, basically I cyber stalk our guests. I was spending some time actually on the website, and the thing that kind of intrigues me is the Tsunami motorcycle display.
Mm-hmm.
It's. Can you tell us the story about it? Because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. So we have a motorcycle on display that is slowly disintegrating, which is unusual in general. But this motorcycle had quite the story to it. It was stored in a container, one of those big shipping containers in Japan. And when tsunami hit in 2011, right?
Mm-hmm.
It got washed out to sea with everything else that got washed out to sea. And I think, remember back to that time period, you remember hearing stuff about washing up on the West Coast and Canadian beaches and all this stuff from Japan sailing across the ocean. Well, this container sailed across the Pacific Ocean and landed on a beach in British Columbia with the motorcycle still inside. And a beachcomber, was walking the beach and found this container and looked inside, and here's this motorcycle sitting inside, and it wasn't an easy beach to get to. And so by the time the beachcomber got back, the container had washed back out to sea, but the motorcycle had landed in the sand and was buried underneath the sand. They were able to identify the person who owned the motorcycle because it still had his license plates on it. The motor, how did this go? The people who found the bike, I think, worked with the local dealership in British Columbia who contacted the motor company, who then, because of the license plate, found the guy in Japan, and he said, "No, just keep the bike. I don't want a replacement bike. We're dealing with things, and I just, the fact that my bike sailed across the ocean doesn't mean I should get a free motorcycle."
Interesting.
Out of the deal, and keep the bike. So the bike went to the museum, and we've still got it on exhibit. And most of the time when a motorcycle comes into our collection, what we'll do is we'll conserve it, which means we don't want to change the nature of the bike. We don't want to bang out dents and get a new paint job on it and, buff out rust spots and re-chrome or re-nickel or whatever. We want to leave it as it came to us, because every dent, every scratch, for us is a story of its existence. But we don't want it to go any further. We don't want new scratches and new dents, and we don't want things to continue to rust. So we'll find ways to conserve and basically halt any degradation as soon as we can. With this motorcycle, there was no way to do that without taking that story out of it, because it had been in the salt water for months and months and months, and then in the sand, and so the decision at that point was just to let it kind of continue to disintegrate. So, it's a changing artifact. You can go to it, and there's these salt crystals that grow out of the motorcycle, and they'll grow into towers, and they'll collapse, and they'll grow into towers, and they'll collapse.
Wow.
And so
even now.
Yeah. Even visually, it changes, month to month. If you're really paying attention and you really come often enough, you'll see something new with it.
Yeah,
that was the 2004 FX STB Softail Night Train motorcycle.
Yep.
Yeah, and what's the deal with those model names, with all those alphabet soup designations?
Well, the alphabet soup goes back to the early part of the company,
right?
And there is a meaning to all the alphabet soup.
Yeah. I know. I'm just messing with you.
No. That's right. I think it's something that, I mentioned again. We've got all these non-riders coming through, and what is the 1936 EL motorcycle? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does EL mean? Or FL or FLH or and they go on and on and on. But
yeah, I have to admit, when way back when I was in my I was still in my teens. My stepdad had a Sportster. And that was the most singularly uncomfortable bike that I have ever put my behind on. I am so sorry. As a passenger, I was like, thank you. It took me about 90 minutes to earn my Iron Ass badge for that one particular trip. I am, and I've been riding street bikes as a passenger since I was 6.
Mm-hmm.
But that one, I was like, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'll pass.
You remember what year it was?
God, you're asking me to do math, and I still have my shoes on. That does not work. Let's see. It was end 80s, because I graduated from high school in 91, and now I just told everybody my age. Excuse me. I'm going to go book my room in the old people's home.
I tell everyone your age.
You heifer. So yeah, it was probably
Dave's not a heifer. He's more of a stallion.
No, he's a heifer.
Yeah.
Please do not try to correct me on the Southern terms of endearment, sweetie. I love you, doll baby. And David and Tim, y'all have to understand, it's kind of a running joke on the podcast that the podcast is in general based out of Georgia. I am the only native-born Georgian, as you can see, University of Georgia, go Dogs. But I'm the only person not based in Georgia.
She's not even in the States at the moment.
I'm not even on the continent.
She's somewhere where it's usually moist.
No.
She's
not. I am not in Brazil today. Thank you very much.
Right. All right.
It's actually sunny here.
So I have a question. Returning us back to the agenda. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, speaking of uncomfortable rides, this is a picture of my grandfather, and I think his 1915 Harley.
What?
That's a Henderson.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Was it?
No, it's an Excelsior Henderson.
Ah.
You can tell by that big X on the fuel tank.
Yeah.
My bad. I was always told it was a Harley.
Well, it still has.
You learn something new.
Yeah. Dead to me.
It aspired to be, right? It aspired to be a Harley, right?
Everything aspires to be a Harley.
I differ with you on that, but
so
I'm a BMW rider myself.
They aspire to be Harleys. No.
David, you mentioned, the whole art of putting together an exhibit or display setup. Has there ever been anything for which it was especially hard to find machines for, or to find exhibit materials for? Like, is there a one-of-one machine out there that you would love to show, but you just can't get it?
No, I mean, for us, again, we're lucky. The one-of-ones in general, we've got them. So, we've got a 1903 1903 Harley that we call serial number 1 at the museum. And considering we only built 3 motorcycles that year, having one of them is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
We also have a 1905, which is also, pretty rare motorcycle to have.
Yeah.
So the one of ones generally, for the most part, I've got already in my collection. It's whenever we kind of spread our wings a little bit, it gets a little exciting. It means I get to connect with new people and find new people that might have the collections that accent, that will help round out ours. Our collection is very focused on Harley-Davidson. That's which is not surprising, and as it should be. So when I want to spread my wings a little bit, road trip exhibit is a great example of that. Where we don't have family station wagons in our collection. So where do I find a family station wagon? And it leads to exciting finds and different people and this is a car show. So I did a drag racing exhibit in what was that, Tim? 2015? In 2015. And for those, we still wanted to cast a wider net. Harley's got a history in drag racing. We've got quite a few drag racing bikes in our collection, but we also wanted to talk about drag racing in general, the history of the sport, where it came from, some of the bigger names. So for that exhibit, I managed to get a hold of two cars, the Stonewoods and Cook Willys, which was a real treat to have coming in to put on exhibit. In fact, I can remember us loading it in the day we were loading in. The guy we hired to do our print and hang our vinyl was finishing up some vinyl work, and they're rolling this car in, and they were having a little bit of trouble getting it over the curb up into the exhibit gallery. And he dropped everything and started running toward the car to help. And my boss goes running after him because he's not allowed to touch anything. Stop. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I just lost my mind. I used to put this car together as a model when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Those cars. And also in that exhibit, we had Don Garlett's Swamp Rat 13, which was nice. Another great find. But it's a little bit of luck of finding people. That's always kind of sometimes tricky, is who has what and where are they. I will always say there's a collector for everything. You just got to find them. So for that exhibit, we found a guy in Pennsylvania, in near East Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who was a antiques dealer, and he mostly dealt in hot rod antiques and at the time he's retired now, but had this wonderful collection of just amazing things that he willingly loaned to us. And that's always the surprise to me, is when people who have these amazing artifacts, amazing objects, I'll call them up and go, hey, would you be interested in loaning stuff? And they go, yeah, sure. And it's always amazing to me that people will just say yeah to that, which is awesome.
That is pretty amazing.
Now,
yeah, go ahead, Misty.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's been probably months ago. I was just clicking around on YouTube, or maybe, no, HBO Max. What was HBO Max? It's now Max. And there's a documentary there about Jason Momoa, who is a very pretty man. I'm just going to go ahead and get that out there right now. But one of Momoa's big things is the 36 Knucklehead and the hill climbing variant of that. And it's basically a whole documentary of them building 4 of these, rebuilding, finding all the spare parts and random parts and everything. Did y'all have anything to do? I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched it, and I've logged a lot of air miles since then. So, was there any cooperation between the museum and this documentary? Because this is pretty historic, talking about the 36 Knuckleheads.
Yeah, I know he's been around a while. And he's been through the museum more than once. And he's worked with the motor company, but I don't think the archives or us had a direct worked with him on that. But he is, he's a big Harley fan. It's interesting with those old engines, the knucklehead, the panheads. You always find people who like one or the other. They become big. I'm a big knucklehead guy, or I'm a big panhead guy, or I'm a big shovelhead guy. And they just go gaga over those.
That reminds me of something. I was watching some other, like a 100th anniversary Harley documentary some years ago, and they had a different celebrity talking about each era of the bikes, and they had Larry Hagman on to talk about the knuckleheads, and the first thing he said was, "They got me to talk about the knuckleheads. What does that say about me?"
Well, David, this brings me to another question off script here is, can you help us reach out to celebrities to come on the show and talk bikes, talk Harleys, and maybe we do some collaborations that way?
Nope, they keep me away from the celebrities.
Dang it.
Me too. Me too. Ever since
Me three.
one unfortunate hostage situation.
Well, mine wasn't a hostage situation, but I'm not allowed to.
That armadillo has never been the same.
Sorry, man. I keep trying to make it up to him, and he just keeps refusing all my flower deliveries. I don't know what else to do.
David, you mentioned earlier that you made an effort. Like, a lot of people who come through the museum are not part of the motorcycle riding community. How do you connect with those folks?
You know, we really focus on the stories of people. To be honest with you, at the museum, you know, it all starts there for us. You know, one of the things I like to say is there are people. You know, I might be the senior exhibits curator at the Harley-Davidson Museum, but there are Harley aficionados out in the world who know more than me about certain things. Oh, yeah. There are, you know, we talk about the knucklehead. There are people who are going to know everything and up and down about knuckleheads through the years and eclipse my knowledge 100 times over those motorcycles, and just about anything. You can find somebody who knows more about a very specific thing in Harley than I do. With those people, you know, you don't really need to. They bring so much with them to the experience when they walk through the doors. They've got all that knowledge, and so they could go through our museums without reading anything and really have a blast. It's really the people that they bring with them sometimes who have no connection to motorcycling that we're looking at, and you know, we're all people, and we all like people stories, I think. And so we really focus in on, you know, who are the people building the motorcycles, you know, who are the people riding these motorcycles, where did they come from, what was their backgrounds, you know, in our section about motorcycle racing, one of the things we always talk about verbally, but also in the exhibit itself is we talk about board track racing, which was popular in the 19-teens and 1920s. You can imagine, I always say, you know, without a picture here, imagine if the Indianapolis 500 or the Indianapolis Raceway was entirely made of pine wood. That was board track racing, big cars, big for motorcycles up until the 20s, late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, I heard a hurricane had something to do with that.
Well, it was just the expense, because these things, you know, they're pine, so they fell apart like nobody's business, and that was part of the racing lore of these things, is that you know, we got motorcycles, so focusing on those, we've got motorcycles from the 20s that would do board track racing, and when I take people up to those, or if you're walking through the museum, what you're going to learn is a couple things. One is these motorcycles were fast; they went over 100 miles an hour. You know, which, you know, considering the time period and the safety measures in place, was quite fast.
Safety measures.
Yeah, exactly. What safety measures?
Safety measures?
They were total oil loss systems. So, you know, they did not have recirculating oil, and the oil was dripping out everywhere when these things were racing down the track. So now you're going 100 miles an hour. You've got oil all over the track. And, oh, by the way, it's not a recirculating system. So you've got to take a hand off the handlebar and pump your own oil every once in a while to get more oil into the engine, going 100 miles an hour on a track with oil all over it. And then add on to that, it's pine, so holes can develop in the track itself. And so you got to be worried about splinters and holes in the track, because you want to hit one of those at 100 miles an hour on a track covered in oil while you're pumping your gas with one hand on the handlebar.
Rusty nail heads sticking up out of the
rusty
boards.
nail heads is just about anything. And then on top of that,
safe.
You know, the bikes have no brakes. So now you're going over 100 miles an hour on an oil-covered wood track with holes in it, splinters flying, and on a bike with no brakes, with one hand on the handlebar while you pump oil. And people, you know, those kind of stories, you don't have to work really hard to imagine, to kind of get excited about those things a little bit, or nervous about those things, or just think to yourself, those people were a little bit nuts. And it connects with people that way. And so we look for stories like that either have somebody at the center of them, that people can understand and connect with, or are stories that doesn't take much for people to have their imaginations fired up.
Amazing. So there are 4 questions left that I have before we wrap our episode today. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to ask David before we jump into those last 4 questions?
So what other museums are you a fan of beyond your own?
Oh man. Geez, a lot. I'm an exhibits curator too, so I even get down to favorite exhibits
Wow.
at museums. I love the Museum of Glass, the Corning Museum of Glass in Corning, New York. If you're ever in Southern New York, that is an amazing experience. Much
this
like
is not
us.
what I was expecting you to say.
No one expects that. No one expects that, especially around my company when I say we need to really look at what they're doing. But it's much like us. How do you take this thing, glass, that yeah, sure, we use it every day, but I don't think any of us really spend a lot of time thinking about it,
right,
and make it interesting. So they go through not only the history side of glass, but then they also talk, as presented as an art as well. And then on top of it, you can sign up for classes that are like blowing glass. Look at me, I'm being a commercial for them right now. Blowing glass.
The development director loves you.
Yeah, I know, exactly. They don't even paying me right now. That's how much I like this one. You can blow glass and classes. It's really quite an amazing place to go to. What else? I've got my own personal nostalgia for other museums. I was an intern at the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, for the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library, which is nostalgia for me a little bit more than anything. There was the Independence Seaport Museum in Philadelphia. Will always have a place in my heart because there was an exhibit they did, oh my gosh, 15 years ago, on sailors' tattoos. That had to be one of the more amazing exhibits I've ever been through. We talk about connecting people, and all it's not Harley-Davidson Museum just doing this. It's everybody. How do you find these hooks? How do you find these ways into the general public's imaginations? And they did an exhibit on the history of sailors' tattoos. I don't have any tattoos. I went because a friend of mine was going, and I was like, "Oh, tattoos are an interesting." I don't know anything tattoos, and they just did a knockout job on this exhibit. I always think about it when I'm doing my own exhibits because I think, how do I get as good as that one was? Because that was a great one.
Right.
The problem with me, I'm a museum person that came to motorcycles, not a motorcycle person who came to museums. So
right, yeah.
I can sit here and we can talk about my favorite children's museums and we're here all day. Really?
I'm game.
I'm fine. But the question is, have you ever visited the Handbag Museum in Amsterdam?
I've never visited the Handbag Museum. I have visited the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, though. Which, if you're ever in Toronto, the Bata Shoe Museum is a great experience to go through. Just down the street from the Royal Ontario Museum, the ROM, which is also a fun museum to visit. So,
nice.
Again, things that I was not expecting you to say. That was
I look. I'm a curious person. I always I'm always looking for something different and something that I didn't know, which is another great part of this job, to be honest with you. It's every new topic that we do, I discover something new, which is fun for me on a personal level. And I hope,
absolutely.
Hopefully fun for my guests.
So my last serious question for you before we wrap the episode, what are some conceptions? I mean, I sort of did this earlier with the whole road trip and leather and stuff like that, but what are some popular misconceptions about the Harley-Davidson community that could clear up?
Exhibit I'm working on right now is that's opening in May. It's going to be called This Is, and it's about Harley riders, really, and different Harley riders and how they explore the sport differently and how they came to it differently. I think when people say Harley riders, they get this immediate imagination of the stereotypical person in their head, like this is a Harley rider. And in reality, when you look at the community, there are so many different people coming at it in different ways. One of my favorite people in the world is a guy by the name of Randy. This is air quotes because this is his nickname, Randy Detroit, but Randy Hayward from Detroit. He's to look at him, you'd be like, oh, okay, he looks like a typical kind of vintage motorcycle rider kind of guy, jeans, knife on his belt, famous motorcycle cap that, looks something like what's his face wore in Wild Ones. I'm forgetting his name now.
Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. Thank you. It's one of those brain farts there. And you look at him and go, okay, yeah, that, but actually getting to know him, well, he was a retired school superintendent, and he's got a Harvard degree, and when you start thinking about him in that aspect, you suddenly start saying, oh, I see where that bleeds over into your motorcycling. He's very passionate about telling the history of Black motorcycle riders. And so he's got this kind of traveling thing. He takes around to motorcycle shows and talks about them. And he works at being inspirational as well. And I think he just naturally is that inspiring to people. And so he was a great teacher, I'm sure, because he's a great person in the motorcycle community. On the flip side of that, where there's somebody like, there's a woman in Boston named Jay Shia. She runs an independent motorcycle shop called Madhouse Motors. And, her story is completely different from Randy's, and she's an artist who builds custom motorcycles. On top of that, she runs this motorcycle shop, which is odd in itself. It's oil changes and bike storage during the winter times and whatnot. And that's an odd kind of conjoining there. Most people who are in custom motorcycles are in custom motorcycles. They don't do oil changes for the general public on the other side.
Right.
And on top of that, then there's this wonderful cafe that's attached to her shop, Madhouse Cafe. And it, serves, baklava and whatnot. And it's just, it's her wrapped up in this business around motorcycling. It's her art. It's her, her background as kind of a center of the community. She grew up in a family that she said, yeah, 100 people piling through the house any given day, and so she built that into her business. And so much of her is wrapped up into this, and it's just really an awesome place. So, yeah, it's not a monolithic culture.
Certainly seems like the stereotype.
Right. Absolutely not.
It's trust me, it's not a pride parade until Dykes with Bikes has come down the front of it.
Amen, brother.
So, all right. So what our listeners may not know is that we, whenever we have a guest, I try to get bullet points or talking points from them to sort of craft the shape of our conversation, make sure we talk about things that are important to the guests. Two things here before we get to my standard 2 questions at the end of the show. You wrote a question here which just stands out to me and has been screaming my name from the start. What's your favorite object?
Well, I have to give credit to my public relations guy, Tim, for that kind of questions. Those are some of their favorite questions to ask, and they're also the hardest for me to answer.
Okay. So what's Tim's favorite object?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a go-to that I go to, which is why it's my go-to. So along with the motorcycles, we have about 500 motorcycles in the collection. But along with that, we also have small artifacts, documents, 250,000 negatives, photograph negatives. So we've got a lot to choose from here. But my favorite artifact out of all these things is a little, it looks like a miniature milk pail, an old like tin milk pail. I'm talking about with the lid and everything. Yeah. And it's got a wire handle on it. And stamped on the side of it is I think it's Harley-Davidson. The story with this thing is that before Prohibition in the factory, when the workers had their breaks, one of the options they had at breaks that was provided by the company was either milk or beer. And so the lowest rankings of all the people working on the factory floor would grab these big poles and they'd walk the factory floor, and the workers would slip these little cans onto these poles as these guys walked past with their order. I want a beer, I want a milk. I want beer, I want milk. And then the guys with these poles would go down. So the factory was a vertical factory. So there was, I'm going to forget the number of 6 floors, 6 floors at the factory. And so they go down to the front of the factory. We actually have a picture of in one of our old in-house magazines of this, and they'd go up and they'd get milk or beer filled up in these cans, and then they'd walk back up to wherever they'd come from and hand out the cans again. So we've got one of these cans in the collection, and we talk about, again, people stories and connective stories that people can connect to, and I think that's one of them. Not only is it a break time, but then you got your favorite beverage you can do. So that's probably my favorite artifact.
Cool. All right. So our typical questions then. I was going to ask if you had a favorite bike, but we may have scratched on that. What is your favorite bike, David?
Oh, it's like asking me what my favorite child is.
Sure.
Yeah.
I will always be. I think I'll always be partial to our 1905, just because it's a funny story. So we got the serial number 1, which is our 1903. But the only thing 1903 on the bike is actually the engine. The engine was 1903. The frame is 1904 and a half, 1905. The 1905 is 1905, but the frame is early 1904. So, so when people go, that's, one of the things that people have a misconception about serial number 1 is that was the first Harley-Davidson, and that's not actually accurate. We don't know if it was the first Harley-Davidson or the first engine, but we do know the frame is older than the frame that is on the 1905. So with those bikes combined, we probably get a really old motorcycle.
It's still amazing either way. I mean,
it's still amazing that we have both of them.
Yeah.
But we got everything from we have an original 1936 knucklehead. So that's the first year for that model. But what's really amazing about the entire collection is the vast majority of it is something we call factory fresh. Starting sometime in the late 19-teens, 1916 and 1919, somewhere around there, the company started saving a motorcycle off the line, one a year at least, right? They'd build it, they'd test it, and then the thing would go into the archives for the company. And so from about that time period, and it's a practice they kept up. We still do it today. In fact, every year we'll look at the new models coming out. We'll go, okay, which ones make sense? Which ones are, significant, or which ones are the company making a big push behind this year? We'll grab one of those right off the factory line and put it in the archive. So, like our 1936 Knucklehead has, I want to say it was 102 miles on it, and most of those from being pushed around for the last 80 plus years. And we've got a 1956 FL with 5 miles on it. So whenever people come walking through our museum, especially people who are big motorcyclists, I'll say, once we get up to the odometer era, start craning your neck a little bit and seeing how many miles are on those motorcycles. You're not going to find motorcycles like these anywhere else in the world. These are mint.
I cannot imagine.
Absolutely,
I just cannot imagine. Yeah. David, we've talked about motorcycles a lot, but it's the thing about cars. And so one of our standard questions is, do you have a dream car?
A dream car?
In this case, I would say, do you have a dream motorcycle? But let's say dream car / dream motorcycle.
Vehicle.
Yeah.
Oh, I could really use a minivan. I'm a very practical person.
And
I've
this
got 2
episode
kids.
will never air.
Yep.
I'm not actually sure it can air. I haven't mentioned Claudette or my overwhelming hatred for Fords yet.
No, she hasn't done that yet. So a minivan, that's an interesting.
No, I'm when it comes to cars, I'm very practical. I'm not, again, this is kind of an odd thing about me is, I came from museums. I did not come from, even transportation history was not something I ever conceived of getting involved in. And so when they hired me because I was an exhibit curator, not because I knew anything about motorcycles. And the truth is, at the time they hired me, I didn't know anything about motorcycles. If you had held me down and told me to explain an internal combustion engine and how they work, I would have been hard pressed to get out of that conversation alive. So when it comes to these kind of things, like, oh, what's your dream? Whatever. I'm a very practical person, like everybody else in the world. I need a minivan. I got 2 kids. But honestly, if you're from a motorcycle standpoint, I've always loved the Hydroglides. If I could get a Hydroglide, the 1948 Hydroglide. I've always loved that motorcycle.
Very cool.
1948 Hydroglide. I can't type today either. What's wrong with me?
We don't have enough time for that, Mickey.
Why do you have to hurt me, Misty? That hurts me.
I love you.
Okay, this looks like just class. Look at that thing. Holy mackerel, that's beautiful. All right.
Yeah,
we've lost Mickey.
You don't, it's an interesting. We don't know. So our first designer that we hired, that was actually company employed, was in 1960. Willie G. Davidson, famous motorcycle designer. His ideas have been revolutionized motorcycling design, especially with cruisers, the cruiser segment, and what we call what he started calling factory customs, which are the more kind of custom looking motorcycles that you see. Revolutionized motorcycle design, but he didn't get hired until 1963. And so prior to 1963, we only have guesses, and we think maybe these are the people designing these motorcycles. Like the 36 knuckle is kind of the touchstone of Harley-Davidson design. A lot of designers still look at that and go, that was the thing. That was
classic. Yeah,
that was a classic. We have no idea who designed it. Not a clue. We think maybe it was engineers at the company, but we don't really know who made that thing. But the 48 Hydroglide, we know who designed that, and a guy named Brooks Stevens. And Brooks Stevens is kind of the father of American industrial design. And he was based out of Milwaukee. And, so he developed a lot of this kind of language, which you can still see on Harley today. The front fender has that kind of cut, that 90-degree angle cut, or that horizontal cut across the front of the top fender, which you can look at a lot of motorcycles. A lot of our touring bikes still have that kind of front fender to it. And that's, it was his company that figured out, okay, we're going to do that in 48. And so that was the introduction of that kind of look. The front forks, the Hydroglide front forks, the look of those, you can still see on some of the models, a kind of an influence from those. So it was a very influential bike in Harley history and design history, and the design language of Harley bikes. But it's just a gorgeous bike.
Yeah, absolutely. David, where's your next road trip likely to be?
Probably to Washington, D.C.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Can't enough politics, or is it?
No, in a way, we've got a potential, and I don't think I could talk too much about it because it hasn't been announced yet, but we got a potential bike coming from Washington that we're excited about.
Very cool.
Stay tuned for that.
Yes. And our last question, which is always selected at random from a list of like 15 questions. You're hosting a dinner party, and you can invite one famous person, living or dead. Who would you invite?
Oh man, I've got a history degree, right? So that's it makes it even more difficult. I can come up with one really random one.
I know. I realize this is an incredibly hard question.
Yes, it is.
If you'd like me to switch it out, I can switch it out.
No, that's fine. Honestly, we talk about kind of the fog of history as you look back. You only get a sense of people through what they've left behind, right? So we have stories about the founders of Harley-Davidson. So there are four of them: Walter Davidson, William Davidson, also known as Bill, and Arthur Davidson, and then William Harley. And you look at photographs of these guys, because there are numerous photographs of them. William Harley is always looking off into the distance, to the side. He's never looking directly at the camera. I think maybe I've seen one picture where they actually got him looking at the camera. Most of the time, he's looking off away from the camera. And I've always been curious about him, to be honest with you, because of that. He's like, okay, what kind of guy was that guy?
Right. It's an interesting idiosyncrasy.
Yeah, it really is. It's almost as they all had their kind of all four, actually. If I had to invite, I know that's not one person, but if I could invite all four and sit them down and learn about their idiosyncrasies. Walter, who was our first executive, never smiled in any of the photographs he took. Actually, we found one. We recently acquired a collection from a Davidson ancestor, and Descendant, excuse me. Get those Davidson Descendant family album of photographs, and we're flipping through it, and there's a picture of Walter smiling, and it completely freaked all of us out because we've never seen a picture of him smiling. Whereas his brother William or Bill is constantly smiling. So they were just kind of interesting guys, and the way they split up the company too. And I've always wondered about, was that just something that came naturally? Because they all had their kind of areas. Harley was the first engineer. Walter was our first chief executive. Bill ran our factories, and Arthur was our first salesman. I've always wondered, was that a conscious decision, or did they just kind of naturally kind of flow into each one of these areas because that's what their personalities or their experiences and expertise were in? So I, getting to sit down with those four guys would be awesome.
That would be awesome. Absolutely.
That would be
David,
so cool. I
can't thank you enough for being our guest today. Tim had no reason to leap across the table to shut off your mic, so that was always a good thing. Let me. I guess it's time to wrap the episode, isn't it? I mean, like trivia time, right? Is that what Misty's saying? That's what David's saying. So let's do yours first, David. Your question, if I remember correctly, if I written it down here, how many different owners has the company? So I'll start. I'll say 8. What do you think, Dave?
I'm assuming we're talking about owners before the company became publicly traded. So because if we're counting all the stockholders, then it's going to be in the I think hundreds of thousands.
Right.
I'm guessing because I think at one point or another, I mean, it's you've got all the brothers. I'm going to say 5.
5, Misty.
Well, I had an answer, and then Dave's like counting all the brothers, but I was kind of counting those like as one, and I was saying like owner groups, and I was on like 2 or 3.
I was also counting the brothers as one set of owners, but yeah, if it makes sense to do them separately. So you're saying 3 groups, Misty, 3 different owner groups.
Yeah.
Ben, you're muted, Ben.
Ben's so shocked he muted himself. Still muted.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm going with 3 as well.
3. Okay. David, what is the answer?
If we're not including the shareholders, then it's 3. Before publicly traded. So you had the family first, and the family owned the company from 1903 to 1969.
Wow.
So still, we're still for most of our history family owned. We're getting close, but we're still for most of our history family owned. Over half of it was still owned by the family. And then in 1969, the family sold the company to AMF. Who today is more famous for bowling equipment than anything else, but at the time was a massive conglomerate. And they owned the company until 1981, when the company had this famous, at least internally, famous something called the buyback, which was 13 managers who've been running the company for AMF bought the company from AMF, who was starting to creak toward their own demise late in the 80s. And so that group owned it until we went public in the late 80s. So we've only had, if you include the shareholders as a group, we've only had 4 or 3 pre-shareholders. So I find that pretty awesome, to be honest with you. I've often thought
awesome.
about that.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of those years, we're the last American motorcycle company.
Yeah.
We're still headquartered in the same building we've been in since the same piece of property since 1908. So
wow,
that's our headquarters. Is our original factory building, Juneau Avenue.
I think that's unusual. I mean, globally, to have a company, that's still so prominent with such brand recognition. It's like, if I have some family that have come over and they're like, we have to go to the Harley-Davidson shop, and I'm like, do you know what a tram ride that is in Amsterdam and what people on trams are? And I hate people.
Thank God we're not in.
Well,
gotta get that T-shirt though. You gotta get that T-shirt.
Yeah. It's a thing. Me, I just collect chickens from all over the world, and places that I go. But people are like, it's like what for my generation. Probably, and I'm going to include Dave in there too. It's like, we always have our Hard Rock Cafe T-shirts, from London, Tokyo, New Delhi,
Yep.
Yeah, it's a lot like that. Yeah,
it's 100% like that.
Hard Rock to chickens.
Chickens. from all over the world. What?
I'm going to show you one. Hold on. I'm actually going to show you one. I cannot say it out loud because that would be so not a good thing.
You guys, David, thank you for hanging with us for this because this is just.
Hey, I like a good chicken.
What the heck is that?
It's from Lisbon. You remember when I went to Lisbon and I ended up in a heavy metal club dressed as a 1950s housewife?
Yes.
And Dave knows exactly what I would have used to reference this. So.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All
right, Ben, let's wrap this. Let's do your trivia question. 1990, what?
Right. So 1990 was the year that the first car equipped with a factory GPS system hit the market. So was that car an Acura NSX? Was it a Mercedes-Benz E-Class? Was it a Mazda Unos Cosmo, or was it a Cadillac Fleetwood? What y'all think?
Who goes first, Ben? You drive it.
How about David, since you're our wonderful guest?
Oh, I have no idea. Don't even. I go with the Cadillac. Do you say Cadillac? Yeah.
That was one of them. Yeah, Fleetwood.
So Dave's saying Cadillac. Who goes next, Ben?
How about Misty?
I'm going with Acura, just because it starts with A.
What do you think, Dave?
I'll go with the Benz.
Okay, and Mickey, what do you think?
Just for variety's sake, I'm going to pick that Mazda.
Okay, well, variety wins. It was, in fact, the Mazda Unos Cosmo.
Wow.
Holy crap balls.
Right. The one little trick in the answer there is there was no 1990 NSX. It didn't come out till the following year. But the other cars did exist. The Unos Cosmo was a rotary-powered sport coupe type thing that was only in the Japan market. It had an optional engine that had 3 rotors and upgrade from the standard 2 rotors. It was a pretty slick car, and of course, under the 25-year law, you can now import one of those to the U.S. if you want.
I've heard Mazda's making rumbles about bringing the 3 rotor back.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, well, they've also made rumbles about bringing small rotaries back as a range extender in EVs. But anyway, right. Yep. This Cosmo was kind of a flagship car. It was top of the line, 2+2 luxury sport kind of thing. And it was pretty slick. They made it from 90 to 96.
Nice.
So, David, if a person wanted to visit the museum, how would they find your website to learn more about how to get there and all those good things? What's the website?
It's really easy. HDmuseum, all one word, .com.
HDmuseum.com. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking time on a Sunday to do this episode with us. And I hope we can meet face to face someday, perhaps even up in the museum. That's a trip that I very much want to make for sure. So.
Absolutely. If you guys are ever in, give us a
Thanks,
shout.
Tim. I know you're muted still, but thank you, Tim. Thank you, David. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode and for putting up with our ramblings. You guys be safe out there no matter what you're riding or driving. We will see you with another one in about a week. Take care, everybody.
See you and keep the rubber side down.
See y'all.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Thing About Cars. We'll see you on the road.